Kelly and I are going to go through the value of lease administration and lease accounting today and start off with some brief introductions first off. Kelly?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Kepley. I oversee the Lease Data Services team here at CoStar. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you, whether that be through lease abstraction or imaging projects, ongoing data management, and certainly best practices consulting. So hope to share some insights today with you regarding lease administration and its convergence with lease accounting.
Thanks, Kelly. Mark McDonald, newly noted Vice President of Customer Success by a few people, really excited about that role. My origin story is not nearly as exciting as Matt Waters and his journey through lease accounting over the last decade or so. I've been at the company for a little over a decade now in a number of different roles and really excited to kind of move past where I was most recently and kind of going to market and help us grow our business in lease accounting and lease management and focus on customer success and really helping our clients achieve maximum value out of the product. In terms of the overview and the session today, so really what we're trying to focus on here is the advantage of the same organization and different departments, both in lease administration or lease management and lease accounting, playing in the same sandbox. I have a couple of young kids at home, so one of the things we like to say is sharing is caring at home, right? So both teams, really one focused on that operational management of corporate real estate and retail real estate, and then the other, the accounting teams that are in support of that function, really operating in the same technology and some of the efficiency gains that can be realized as part of that process. Focusing on a couple of key areas. One, the improved communication between those two teams or three teams in the case what we'll get into in equipment. Documentation and control around lease data and decisions, certainly being a key factor. Efficient audits on the balance sheet and the P&L, both internal and external audits, and talk a little bit about that and some of the efficiencies there. And also the identification of lease spend across the organization. Again, most of the companies that we're working with had a pretty good handle around what that looked like from a real estate standpoint. But we'll talk about that in through the eyes of equipment as well. In terms of some of the key topics, going through a little bit of a maturity model, so application usage. Some of our customers have taken different journeys or started in different places throughout their journey with CoStar, so we'll go through that. The different stakeholders internally that might be part of this project and using the application on a go-forward basis. The information silos that either may have existed and were eliminated or in some cases are still there for companies that we work with. And then go into some of the control and again, audit scrutiny that your teams are certainly under today. So if we go into the really how some of our clients have progressed in terms of their maturity of system usage and some of the value gained as part of their usage with CoStar. Some of you that have been with us for a number of years as customers, started off with that operational real estate management focus, right? So kind of bottom left, going through the lease admin function, real estate only, maybe as part of that initial system usage. From there, other customers on both the lease administration and lease accounting focus as well, and really with an eye towards real estate was kind of the next leg up in terms of that journey. A number of clients started with CoStar over the last few years, combining the lease administration and lease accounting, both with real estate and equipment, all under one roof. Or some of you have kind of grown up that maturity model. I'm not necessarily going to speak too much on the integration side. That's the next step that we see. Jimmy's going to cover that in the next session around connected CoStar, and is going to be focusing on what that detail looks like. And then the full lease asset lifecycle. Some of our clients are using CoStar for that transaction management and project management activity, and that's certainly a key usage as well. Won't be talking about that too much there in this section, primarily focused on these three key areas. Also, with an eye towards customer success, we'll go in and some of you have either started in one place or grown usage over the other. You might be happy with where you are. But certainly one of the things my team's going to be focused on is if you're looking to take that next step and grow usage of the application, automate some of those business processes, what is the most quick and effective way that we can help you get there? And we hope to be kind of a guide in that journey along the way, serving kind of alongside the customer support organization, sales, and the consulting team to help assist some of our customers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, walking through a little bit on the information silos and key stakeholders.
So you'll see I've put them together. Our key stakeholders used to be our siloed side partners, right? We didn't necessarily need to all talk together. We lived independently, we managed our own information, and we kept it straight in our groups. But during the course of this accounting event, we've realized that we can't all do it in a siloed fashion, nor can we continue to live in an Excel spreadsheet and not talk to each other. And as we've gone out and I've met with organizations, we're finding that there is an attempt to come up more with that sharing word, shared services, to begin to look at each individual group and what they bring to bear with regard to lease accounting and possibly lease administration. In many cases, I've talked to lease accounting groups that weren't aware that the real estate department had such a thing as a lease administration department. What is that? It has lease in the name. I should get to know those people. So that's what we've been encouraging others to do. I've had the opportunity to work with several companies that they've gone in and they've started the communication with each one of these critical stakeholders. How do you use lease data? Show us the tools you use, the processes you follow. And we start to outline group by group where we may have redundancy, overlap, or God forbid, gap, right? We're missing something that's really critical for us to accomplish 842. So with that exercise, we were able to start to leverage subject matter expertise. And we found that crossing over into each one of these groups, they all have an impact at the end of the day on 842. They also have a huge impact on the organization because they were performing tasks related to leases all along. So when we talk through them, real estate, property management, of course, lease administration, now we get into more of the non-real estate groups that are also being impacted, procurement, facilities, logistics. These are even new groups that even our lease administration friends in real estate aren't familiar with. So you really want to take the opportunity, and I have some great documentation. If you email me, I'll share it with you. It's a series of about 80 tasks that just for a standard lease administration team, we believe occurs in a standard lease administration group. You then take that task list, you break it down by time and effort, and monthly activities, weekly activities, etc. Take that same task list and start to walk through with all these other groups. What we found is redundant systems, redundant processes, and siloed information that no one knew they could have had access to, right? So the whole purpose of a shared database is just that, to bring the reader, the consumer to the information, not to have us all have our own separate hubs of information. So the concept of shared services is very popular now, taking decentralized control and creating a centralized control, especially around equipment. We're seeing that move because a lot of these leases couldn't even be located when the initial collection of data occurred for 842. So now we have a lot more shared information living at the corporate view, ending a lot of decentralization. Why will we benefit if we take these steps to work together and try and eliminate these silos of information? Of course, we're going to get streamline reporting. We're going to be able to use the same information across all of the teams. We're going to have one version of the truth. If you have lease administrators in the room, you probably know that you may typically say, how many copies of the lease do you think are in your organization? There should be one electronic version, one legally bound version, and everyone should be reviewing that data. But I guarantee you, there's probably 30 to 50 versions of those leases that live in people's desks in some cases. So that's a big risk from a confidentiality standpoint as well. So one version of the truth, consolidated information that's going to impact the balance sheet, the P&L, and the operational decisions that are being made for real estate, equipment. Now we see the full view of our organization. We're also going to be able to consolidate reporting. No longer will we have the same report being run in 6 different versions. We'll have one version that represents the entire corporate initiative. And then we eliminate redundant tools and practices across the corporate landscape. What's the goal here? We raise up efficiency, we increase accuracy, and we have consistency. So huge gains if you can take the opportunity to look across the entire organization to see where you can be leveraging the best of the best for your accounting and your real estate and your equipment administration. So with that said, how would we create a workflow process that might work for this? So everybody study that chart we'll talk in 15 minutes. No, let's talk about workflow. Now, this is just one example to give you the concept of how a lease actually does impact your organization on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis. So what happens first? The lease gets negotiated. In the real estate world, that's your real estate team, potentially your legal team. Maybe it's an outside brokerage firm. It's procurement or an outside vendor with regard to equipment. We then draft and execute the lease. Again, we have to get legal involved. We may have others reviewing and approving the drafts. We then have property is available for use. Now, I've limited this to try and keep it to more of a real estate / accounting view. But once that lease is unleashed into your organization, it really has bigger impact than that, right? Facilities gets involved, logistics gets involved, lease administration is still working with that lease and managing that lease. Legal is still in control of that lease if there's any type of breach, right? So we're now just growing the family of people that are connected to this lease data. The next thing that happens, my favorite, the lease gets abstracted. Yay. All of that core data goes into CoStar. For you that have implemented solely in accounting, you do have all your critical data related to what you need for 842. But when you get the opportunity to really expand the use of CoStar and look at the full portfolio functionality, there is so much more that you can be doing with regard to your data. And so we want to help you on that journey to see how you can expand what you already have. So with regard to that data is abstracted. Now, this is critical. The data is reviewed. And you'll notice who it's reviewed by, the team that entered it. That's pass number 1. So we entered it. We had a peer or a supervisor review it and approve it, and now we're going to pass it, because we've blessed it, on to the next group of important individuals that are going to use the information for reporting purposes, payment purposes, etc. So one review has already occurred. Once it passes, and that's communicated via some sort of date stamp communication, like in CoStar, or updates the accounting dashboard, like in CoStar, that's going to trigger another review. So now what we have done is we've created a much better audit trail, right? We have a process in place that says it was abstracted, it was reviewed, it was passed to accounting, it was reviewed. So we have a two-step review in place. That's going to ensure that we have accurate information. The next thing we do, we pay rent. How many of you are using the accounts payable functionality in CoStar today? And Jimmy will talk about integrating that into your
entry is not valid.
Yes, it is. So with accounts payable, you can even go further in the life cycle of the lease to talk about integrating that data, which Jimmy will cover soon. After that, we rely on that same data, all the same information, still expanding the team that's using it, into creating amortization schedules, reviewing and approving them, and finally booking the journal entry. That's just a new lease coming into your organization and how much it impacts the entire corporate view. That's one workflow. You can develop, obviously, your own that works best for your organization, but this is one that we have seen consistently with that double review being very critical. Okay.
Before we move on to the next one, maybe a quick plug here. So Kelly, you raised your hand on who's using CoStar for the accounts payable functionality. In order to track this process internally within an organization, again, for a number of our clients that started with us on both the accounting and admin front, really as a result of 842 compliance, there is system functionality that a lot of us either tabled for adoption or perhaps have internal workarounds for that really walk the organization through from the top section that Kelly talked about, even before that lease is negotiated. So through that site selection and business process activity there, really through to that abstraction complete process, right? So if we were to take a look at that, and it involves a number of different departments internally, right? Between the real estate team, finance, legal, lease administration, et cetera. That's really the use case and a large business value and proposition for that transaction management or project management functionality. So especially for our clients that have large real estate portfolios, let's say north of 200 locations or so, where there's a lot of churn going on within that portfolio on an annual basis, that's certainly something that my team's going to be a little bit more proactive about in terms of outreach to see where we can potentially streamline some business process internally and see if that's a potential room for future growth as part of that transaction management effort.
Smart. So as Matt Waters indicated earlier, I just walked you through a new lease. It's been signed, it's been executed, it's been abstracted, placed in the database, and it's now in a position to be reported against. But every day, the life cycle of that lease is changing, right? So these are the same processes that Matt had on his slide. So for each one of these events, that is going to take a slightly different workflow path within your organization. It may not impact the same groups that a new lease did. It may be a subset of those groups, but you need to make sure that you're considering the following whenever you're working through your workflow processing planning. Keep the data review and approval process in there. I cannot stress that enough. You do not want to be on the back end of an amortization schedule that has to go all the way back uphill for correction because we didn't take the time to review the data initially, right? So key support a review and approval process. Document that communication when routing to other groups. One of the things in workflow, it depends again who owns what data, but I'll use a CoStar example. If I have in lease administration own inputting all of the data and doing a thorough review of the data, and then I pass it to accounting, at which time they can see it on the dashboard and recognize they can take it over. That lease may have gone into a needs review status and appear on the accounting dashboard before it's gone through my approval process in real estate. So we want to be very cautious that you have a part of your workflow to say, we still need to do a review. The lease data is in the system, but another communication needs to go behind it, ensuring that they know when you believe the data is complete and accurate, not when it's in process. So it is a timing. Matt talked about timing. It's very critical that within your workflow processes, you plan out those communications. And I assume that they should be electronic and date stamped and time stamped so we have documentation to support that the communication was made. All right? Make sure you understand how each event may impact other groups. Back to Matt's point, if you are sitting on a renewal because you've got other things to do and that renewal has now crossed a different period, if you're not aware of the downstream impact, that's going to continue to cause a problem. So being more proactively understanding what you are to do and when you are to do it to meet month-end close, quarter close, et cetera, it's going to be very helpful. Because for the lease administration world, that's very different for us. We don't necessarily have not had to in the past adhere to those types of deadlines. So be cautious about that. And then I'm a big believer in documentation. So once you've gone through the exercise, once you've met with the teams, once you've developed the process, put it to paper. Your auditors are going to love it, right? And you're also going to have good documentation to support and to pass on as you grow your teams.
Yeah, and I think in terms of some of the customers that we've seen going through successful implementations, especially relating to 842 and combining this lease administration and lease accounting activity, the companies that took the time and resources either internally to document not necessarily the current state, but especially what that future state's going to look like as a result of accounting compliance, and whether they were able to use internal resources for that or hired external accounting consultants or people to come in and map those business processes, that definitely sped up the time for implementation. So for some of our private companies maybe that aren't there yet, or clients that are still kind of midway through, that was certainly something that we've seen gain some efficiencies and led to a smoother implementation down the line. To Kelly's point, it's going to speed up your project, but also you'll have those artifacts there on a go-forward basis to be able to reference, which can be helpful not only for a year-end audit, but also on a go-forward basis as you're onboarding new resources. If there's content available, not just on how to use CoStar from a system standpoint, but also what are the impacts of your behavior on behalf of the organization, or where you're reliant on people either upstream or downstream for you. Those process maps are certainly something that we've seen as being very helpful to organizations. Unfortunately, it does take either the time on your side of resources or the money to go hire somebody else to do it. But the outcomes at the end of the day, I think, have been very beneficial there.
Yeah, it's definitely a strong investment into proactive environment. So I just want to cover again why it's worth the effort, why it's worth the investment, why it's awesome for you to consider using CoStar on an expanded basis are really for many reasons, but here are a few. Eliminate duplicative efforts across the organization. I cannot tell you, I'll tell you my one little story and I'll go fast, but I was doing an interview with a customer trying to figure out where they could gain efficiencies. I met with one group and they explained to me a 20-minute process that they did every time they had to send an invoice to accounts payable. They'd go to the lease, they'd print the page, they'd highlight the section, they'd staple on the invoice, they'd date stamp it, they'd put their little coding on it, and they'd send it to accounting. About 15 to 20 minutes to process one invoice. I met with accounting. I said, so you received this invoice. Let me know, what do you do with all of that backup? Oh, we don't look at that. If we need the backup, we go to the lease. 20 minutes wasted on something that nobody was valuing. It wasn't doing anything for the receiver of the information. So having those conversations, you'll find you're really going to save yourself some time inevitably. Leveraging subject matter expertise. If you have a lease administration team today, I guarantee you no one knows your leases better than that team. So understanding their knowledge and their understanding of the real estate lease, the equipment lease, whatever the case may be, leveraging those people are going to give you a better, more accurate experience. Leverage accounts payable functionality, we talked about that earlier. I think anything you can do to leverage the information that is in CoStar via integration, via full life cycle, is going to be nothing but more efficient and more consistent and accurate for your whole organization. Obviously, with processes documented, you're going to have a much better audit experience. And finally, you're going to increase your corporate efficiency and accuracy. And if there's anything we know we have to get right, are these numbers, right? At the end of the day, that balance sheet has to be right. And it starts all the way back to the execution of that document and as it goes through your whole organization. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So one of the things that we're gonna touch on is the kind of the internal control process, and with that, Kelly mentioned it, and you guys raised your hands in terms of who is leveraging CoStar for that AP function. So while this is not necessarily directly related to audit, on a go-forward basis, really streamlining that reconciliation process. So one of the things that Matt mentioned is in terms of that integration with Blackline, which certainly kind of helps streamline that month-end close process. If we're integrated from an AP standpoint, if CoStar is serving as that system of record for payment and that system of record for the debit and credit, or that journal entry related to lease accounting, you don't have to go through that reconciliation, right? We're serving as both. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of the equipment-related process that might be a little bit more decentralized from a payment standpoint, but being able to leverage real estate and your current application functionality and what you've invested in from a software standpoint, there may take a little bit of work from in terms of integration, but you'll be able to definitely save time at month end and really eliminate one component, or really streamline one component of that reconciliation process related to that entry. So again, playing in the same sandbox, we talk about mitigating risk and data accuracy. Kelly was just mentioning that in terms of really being able to leverage that single source of truth. And really just comes down to a time savings at the end of the day, right? Oftentimes we're asked during the sales process to justify an ROI or put together an ROI analysis, right? And one of those big things is purely the time savings for two teams internally not having to go through the process of abstracting a lease and entering it in two different places. And certainly that's a component, or that's an input to our process. How many leases are you executing or amending in a given time frame? And that's certainly an input to that ROI model. So that's one, just a time savings point of view. But then also, as you talk about the audit process, if you're auditing one individual place, either internally or externally, you're going to be able to save time there as well. And again, directly from a monetary standpoint, that's something that we'll be able to streamline. Also, the audit trail for certain types of lease level transactions. What we mean by that is when individual leases are entered, updated, as journal entries are processed. Matt showed some screenshots of basically tracking those clicks. A lot of clients that we're working with or that went through the implementation process to satisfy that initial compliance deadline, their auditors are now coming back and saying, prove to me who has access to the application. What level of access do they have? What do they have the ability to update on a recurring basis, or going to a specific lease and being able to prove who was the person that processed that payment or approved or executed that journal entry. So all of those things, being able to report on those, and again, leveraging that single environment to do that, is going to be able to streamline that audit process either internally or externally. Another thing that we're starting to see, or that I've heard from a few different customers, is they're giving access to their internal audit team, access to CoStar. They're creating a view-only login for them to be able to go in and see details, pull lease documents, being able to go run some of those audit reports. But then if we can create a separate section for them within the lease, so think about it as internal audits, data entry component, where they don't touch anything on the lease record, they're not maintaining or updating any data, but they can log the activity that, yes, I as an internal auditor did go in and validated this record, and they can run a report on a quarterly basis or annual basis that said, of my 500 leases, I went through and touched 50 of them or some percentage of them. That's something that we're starting to see there, and it really becomes something that we can use for proof points. Kelly's team uses that as they abstract leases from a metrics tracking point of view, so it's very similar. An analyst can go in and say, Jane Doe John Smith spent X amount of time going in and actually abstracting that record. It's a similar point of view on the internal audit side, but being able to track those clicks and really provide that to external audit at the end of the day. A lot of our talks thus far have been focused on the on the real estate side. So going through and more with a focus towards the equipment lease administration. Typically we've been talking about the 80-20 rule in terms of quantity versus balance sheet impact, where from a quantity standpoint, many of our customers, the real estate is smaller, volume, if you will, but making up a much larger balance sheet impact. That's resulted in a number of things. The volume of equipment leases were harder to get to at the front end. They're more decentralized in terms of who has the ability to actually execute those. It wasn't managed through a central team like a corporate real estate function typically would be. And so the process of finding those was difficult. But being able to leverage a single system as a result of the 842 implementation, or as a result of lease accounting compliance, has been able to kind of point everyone in that same direction. And that's led to a couple of things. One, being able to really run a single report, single view of any lease activity, which is certainly important from an accounting standpoint for disclosure-related activity, but also to be able to analyze spend. We now have one place, or presumably we have one place that we can go to be able to report on all of our lease-related obligations, right? And that doesn't matter if it's a building or a retail store or a forklift or point-of-sale equipment that we might be leasing. All of that we can find presumably under one roof if we've done our jobs relating to that accounting compliance. And then also being able to, again, take those disparate business functions that might have existed embedded within, individual locations and geographic disparities, and kind of bringing those all under one roof. Certainly, being able to be able to leverage that control environment that we just talked to on the previous slide. A couple of things in addition to that. These, from a materiality standpoint, there wasn't a lot of visibility to those. So being able to leverage the application to be able to track some of those data elements or data points, both on the recurring side, which is certainly going to impact the balance sheet, but then also being able to at least identify how you're being invoiced related to some of those variable payments, per mile, per click, et cetera, depending on what type of asset it is. Those become reportable data elements that your operational teams can then use, apart from just the accounting compliance effort and the journal entries. And then also being able to perhaps connect with some of your suppliers where you have aggregated or concentrated leasing activity. And again, I think Jimmy will talk to this a bit more in the second slide, and being able to leverage some of that automation. Going back to Kelly's slide on the workflow, again, that was pretty much through the eyes or in the context of a corporate real estate lease. We mentioned that there is functionality out there to be able to manage the effort relating to the workflows and the different business teams that are participating in the execution of a real estate lease. Some of our early adopter equipment clients also use that same functionality to be able to leverage any procurement-related activity, equipment included. So not just using that functionality for, let's say, approvals and execution of a new corporate real estate lease, but really being able to route that internal procurement approval request internally within the business, even if it was equipment related, a forklift or maybe something over some type of threshold that was out there. They then were able to go through and use that same functionality to automate that, pass that back and forth between different business functions in order to leverage, again, a controlled and process environment in order to track that detail. So again, going back to the before we wrap up and take a few questions here, going back to that maturity curve. I mentioned customer success at the front of the presentation, so maybe one more view towards that. One of the things that I've certainly been focused on is how we help customers really go up this curve, right? Or be able to be more mature in their processes or leverage their investment in the technology. And I think one of those components is really making sure we're easy to do business with. And maybe what I mean by that is, or an example, right? I got rear-ended driving to work this morning. It was a nasty day in Atlanta. Driving into work, my normal commute, not texting me, and so I was rear-ended, and so we had to pull over, and we've all been there. But now you can basically do everything on your phone. You can get your insurance app comes up. I won't name names because we have a few clients in the industry, but you can take photos, report a claim, et cetera, and you don't have to talk to a human if you exchange information appropriately. And it's really just seamless compared to where we may have been 5 years ago, even if that same event occurred and I'm stuck by the road for 2 hours, kind of waiting for an adjuster to show up or something like that. That said, we should be as easy to do business with across the life cycle of a customer, right? So both in the initial implementation, but then on a go-forward basis, if you have a request, if you are looking to extend your usage of CoStar, if you're looking to leverage best practices for what some of our other customers are doing, we want to make sure you have an outlet and an easy way to make contact with us. In some cases, that will be a person and somebody on the customer success team. In other cases, that's just more proactive outreach on behalf of our product team. And being able to really kind of get you up the maturity curve here is our goal at the end of the day.